Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Cloud Native Now podcast. I'm your host, Mike Vizard. We're with Mitch Ashley, who's Vice President and Practice Lead for DevOps and Application Development and anything else related to software at the Futurum Group. Mitch, how you doing?
Hey, great to be on again in this new role, right?
There you go, man. Yeah. An upgrade, I'm sure.
Awesome.
And, as you transition in this role, there was a report that you did for Techstrong Research, and all of this is now coming together under Futurum. But one of the interesting aspects of this whole thing was in the report, it kind of looked at adoption of containers and orchestration platforms. And of course, that's of core interest to the cloud native folks. And I want to get your take on that because it kind of suggests, well, that 60% of the folks are increasing their investments in the next 2 years and 20% are going to be very aggressive about that. Where does that level of investment go? Because I've seen this kind of interesting dichotomy where people are embracing containers, but they're not so quick to embrace the orchestration side of it, which is a little more challenging and maybe a little more difficult and certainly requires a lot more expertise. So what is your sense of how are containers and orchestration and this move to microservices and cloud native evolving?
I think that's the right way to break it down. Think of it as containers, orchestration, and microservices. You don't have to do all three, right? I mean, you probably need to do containers to do orchestration, but cloud microservices doesn't have to be there. Though, if you're doing microservices, you're going to want to do it. Containers are relatively easy to adopt, right? It's a packaging mechanism, and whether it's Docker or open source or whatever it might be, it's and the runtime for it is not heavy lift to involve. So a lot of people are doing that because just portability of moving it across machines. I don't have to worry about running a tar file to install everything on some local directory. It kind of is like a virtualized, if you will, without the hardware, interpretation layer. And orchestration comes into play, I think, even more so when you have microservices, because you have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of microservices or instances of them running. When we did the research on DevOps Next, we were looking at sort of this full spectrum of DevOps across the SDLC. And one set of questions was around cloud native and its adoption. So it didn't dial into a lot of depth on that, but it was over half, I think it was around 56% of people said that they had deployed applications using microservices. Now, when you do a DevOps survey, there's a little bit of selection bias when people say, I'd like to fill that out, right? Because I'm interested in this topic. So sometimes that kind of increases your numbers a bit. Because that to me, I thought was a little higher than I would have expected to go all the way to microservices. Now you're redesigning the architecture of your applications. So, but I think the point being, containers are very easy to get into. Orchestration involves Kubernetes. That gets complex as well as microservices do too.
Yeah, there's a lot to take apart here. We're headed into KubeCon, and almost every KubeCon now has the same kind of vibe. We all show up and we go, wow, isn't this amazing? And 10 years on, and this is great. And then about 3 or 4 hours in, we start going, man, this is hard. How do we make it easier? And now we get all these data scientists complaining about how hard it is too. And is there something to be done to make orchestration simpler? And how can we get to that? Or is it always going to be inherently complex?
Well, even go back to, I think Alan interviewed one of the creators, Alan Schimmel, the CEO and chief editor, whatever his title is with these days with Techstrong. And even the creators of Kubernetes say it's too complex, but it does some very sophisticated things. I think most people have gone down the path of, I'm not going to build it myself. I'm not going to try and run and operate all of it myself. Maybe if I'm in a cloud hyperscaler, I'll use their Kubernetes offering and at least get some help with the management of it. Now, it's not an outsourced run it for me kind of thing, but it does take a lot of the configuration and setup and maintenance off your hands, which is it's still part of the complexity of it as well. And then the question is, what are you using it for? one of the things I find fascinating about Kubernetes in particular is, because you're using Kubernetes if you're using, or containers if you're using Kubernetes, is we're starting to see Kubernetes show up in technology products that are being sold to IT organizations that are delivered on the cloud, maybe delivered at the edge, or running a K3 or K0 lightweight version of Kubernetes. So, all of those point to there's something to this. It may be complex, but I think that KubeCon, my observation, the last couple is it's almost just a developer conference as much as it is about Kubernetes. More so, I think that's why we see all the different people coming in. It's my friends. It's the black shirt and backpack crowd. So much I know I'm home.
And to your point, I might not see Kubernetes, right? It's supposed to be a platform for building platforms, and it may be embedded in an application, or it may be a managed service with an API. And theoretically, I need to know less and less about it as we go along, hopefully.
Well, and I think that's what people are trying to do is like, how do I not have to deal with all of it? Is there a better way than us, taking all of the burden on ourselves?
Microservices, some people love them, some people hate them. And you've heard stories about people embracing microservices only to run back to monoliths. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, where are we on this kind of giant adventure? Because sometimes I talk to other folks and they're like, well, yeah, it's a microservice. I put it in a container and I stuck an API on it, and you can call it. And some of us refer to that as, a big ass microservice. So, are we just getting more practical about all this stuff? And we're saying, let's not get caught up in the size of the thing and just say, so long as it's a component and it's callable, that's what we're aiming for.
Well, it's sort of the hammer and nail. If everything is software, it doesn't mean everything has to be a microservice, right? Mm-hmm. So it's what is it good for, and why are you going to go down that path? We're supposed to do it because the cool kids are doing it, right? Let's go do microservices. And then there's let's see, why would it help us? And usually the benefits around microservices are for scalability and also for producing production codes faster, because you can deliver smaller pieces of code. Now, there's always a debate about, well, what is a microservice? What do you make a microservice? How big is it? How small is it? And there are sort of theoretical definitions about one immutable task that it's doing. But it really comes down to, if you need lots of scalability in an application, but you don't need the full app to scale. Maybe it's I don't need the credit app check microservices to scale. Maybe I don't need to go rebuild that. Let's just call the credit check app to do that. But I do want to put the orchestrator that handles the routing of where applications are in the process, so they get to the next step as the fastest possible place. Or maybe the ingestion of it from how we receive it, a end user experience, so that's fast and can scale if we have a big, push to sell at the end of the year, or we're, whatever the latest Toys R Us are. We want to order as many things as we can. I think you want to look there for it. So my own experience was, we had a monolith application, an ASP.NET application, and we wanted to do more with it, but a lot of it nobody knew how to touch anymore. So we carved off just a piece of it and said, let's use that part and we'll make that microservices. It turned out really well because we didn't go bigger than we needed to, and we could experiment more and put some new services in market more quickly.
Yeah, I feel like we got caught up in some sort of religious discussion without realizing that maybe we're actually all hanging out in the same church anyway.
We've never had those happen before. Religious discussions around software architecture methodology. What are you trying to say, Mike?
There you go. I do wonder if maybe we missed the point about microservices. I mean, we were talking about cyber resiliency, you and I and the rest of the Techstrong gang, in a couple episodes ago. And when I look at microservices, one of the things that's attractive about it is that, well, you can reroute API calls when there's an issue with a service, and the whole application environment becomes more resilient as a result. And I just wonder if that's not the best use case for going to microservices, or the best justification at this point, because if there is an outage or if there is a cyber attack, I might have a way to kind of not have the whole thing come crashing down.
It's a great point because, resiliency can be meeting the demand as well, right? As well as failures. There's lots and our kind of working definition around resiliency isn't recovering from a failure. It's withstanding sort of really trying or untested conditions so that you still stand up, your app is still running, maybe a little bit of degraded performance, maybe here and there, but you're not crashing and bringing the whole thing down to its knees. So not everybody's a Netflix. Not everybody needs to scale up at, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. and handle all the movies that everybody's watching across whatever region. We are an online site and maybe our high demand peaks are in the holiday season or we do an Amazon Prime kind of a special. And so we're going to get a lot more orders and it's those peaks that you want to be able to meet or we have very kind of regional applications. But when something happens, I don't want to be solely dependent upon that one region. Let me fail over to another one. Better yet, let me gracefully fail over by spinning up more microservices to meet the demand. And that's the other great thing is you're not spinning up big monolith applications, multiple of them. You're spinning up the 2, half dozen, 10 different microservices that might be involved in that part of the engagement with the end user. So it has that big advantage. So it can be a lot faster to bring those up and take them down.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that always struck me was, I think if once you move to cloud native and microservices and Kubernetes, it kind of requires a level of maturity around DevOps itself to succeed. And these things are kind of closely linked. But I wonder if part of the problem with maybe moving to cloud native in general is that it does require a level of DevOps expertise that a lot of organizations don't necessarily have. So is DevOps kind of a prerequisite for being successful with cloud native?
We had this debate actually on a roundtable about a year ago, maybe it was a little longer, and said, does microservices or cloud native require DevOps? Can you do it without it? And if you think about it, why they fit so naturally together is DevOps is about spinning up the flywheel so you can produce software at a higher velocity. And part of the way you can do that is by creating smaller units of work that goes through those pipelines instead of very large applications. And you could still do it with very large applications. But imagine, so it fits really well with microservices and containerized parts of your application because that can flow through very quickly. It's made to do that. Doing it without DevOps is, okay, so now I'm running a bunch of scripts and trying to orchestrate all of that myself and not using necessarily a CI/CD pipeline to do it or an automated testing platform to do that. Or essentially, you'll end up at the same place. So I think the result of that debate that we had in the roundtable is you could try it, but the question would be, what were you thinking? Why did you go down that path? You already know how to do DevOps. You're set up to go. Take it.
Or if you do go down that path without DevOps, you're eventually going to find yourself in the land of DevOps because you're going to adopt the principles and instead of reinventing that wheel, you could just read the book, right?
Kind of, I guess you're backing into it, but you're there, right? You end up
exactly.
in the same place.
It's like, look, Ma, no hands, DevOps. Hey.
I guess I do have hands. Okay.
Anyway, ultimately, what do you think the term cloud native now means then? Because originally it was kind of like, oh, we're going to do Kubernetes and microservices, and this is all different. But now we encapsulate virtual machines into containers, and everything's kind of running on some type of cloud, but it may not be a hyperscaler. So how has all this evolved in your mind?
Another panel we had a debate about what does cloud native mean was at DevOps World last year. I started because I followed the CNCF definition. It's changed now, but originally it was you're using containers, container orchestration, Kubernetes, microservices. There was another one, I can't remember what it was, and open source software. And you're designing and building applications that way, which is sort of the next architecture of how to evolve your applications. That is is broadened. Like all of our terms, right, Mike, we start to apply them to many things. And folks that weren't going down the microservices path of cloud native start to consider, well, I'm building applications, but I'm also building them differently, even though I'm not using microservices. I'm building differently because I'm building them in the cloud native, sort of like a digital native, right? You grew up with a cell phone since you were, a little kid. Now the kids, when did they get a cell phone? Is it 2 or age 3 or a year and a half? Exactly when can they run one of those? It's kind of the same thing for apps. It's built for the cloud, in the cloud, to operate that way. And you can define what those attributes are. There's no strict definition of it. You could build an app it may be closer to a monolith in architecture, but you're using services from AWS or Azure, Google, wherever the cloud is, or Oracle, IBM, et cetera, and designing it around a more malleable, flexible infrastructure rather than I have a fixed set of this. So let me give you one example. One of the first ahas for me about why the cloud was different, everybody thought, oh, it's just somebody else's computer. Well, yeah, but when you have a really large set of computers, resources, storage, processing, et cetera. I was at a talk at the first AWS reInvent, and one of the AWS folks was talking about how they do upgrades. They didn't do upgrades like we've always done them. Everybody did, which is you have a system, we're going to be down for the weekend or for these hours, and we'll upgrade it, do a lot of praying and laying of hands on the software to hope that it all worked, and then turn it back on or back it out if we had a failure. And he described it as, no, you keep this running, you let that run, you bring up these servers over here, you install the new software, you start to point some traffic from here to there, gradually, okay, it's good, great, now it's all running over here, bring this part down. Okay, that's a different way. Now that's an example of something that would be cloud native and how you could build your application and also run it like that.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. If your thinking gets really rigid, chances are you might be doing yourself a disservice in a world where flexibility is everything. And all these different tools and capabilities you have out there, use them. That's why they're there. And we didn't just create them so we can have an argument over architecture. Hey, Mitch, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. And thank you all for watching the latest episode of The Cloud Native Now. You can find this episode and others on our website. By all means, check them out. We'll also be on Spotify and all your favorite social distribution channels for podcasts. And until then, we'll see you next time.